Well, the night of the NBA draft has to be one of the most hopeful days on the NBA calendar. Hope that your team will draft the next superstar. Hope that they'll maybe draft that last piece that might just put your team on track to win the championship. Or hope that your team trades its picks and gets a star that way. And it's also a very exciting moment for young players. They get to see their childhood dreams finally come true. For my next guest, the NBA draft is a culmination of all his work for the prior 12 months and beyond. Will Harrison is a scouting analyst for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's been with the team for the last 6 years. Before that, he played professionally in Australia and was a star university player here in Ontario. He's taken some time from his busy schedule full of basketball to come on Canada's Court and talk about, of course, basketball. Will, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is wonderful.
Thanks for having me on, Philip. Happy to talk to you.
So I understand that basketball fans here in Ontario might actually know you by another name. Could you tell me a bit about what's up with that?
Sure. So my first name is Will. My middle name is Kale. My entire life, I kind of went by both, which created some confusion. I'm sure the Laurier fans will remember me as Kale Harrison. As I kind of started my professional career, I thought it would be easier and kind of get rid of that confusion to go by my first name, Will. So here we are, Will Harrison.
Now, there were some pretty impressive coaches at the time you were playing university basketball in Ontario. Do I got that right?
You do, yeah. This is a topic I like to talk about often when I run into Canada basketball people. So I was there, from 2007 to 2012. And in my time at Ryerson, we had Roy Rana, who has gone on to coach in the NBA for numerous years and now is a high-level coach in Europe and coaches the Egyptian national team. We have Scott Morrison, who was a coach at Lakehead and has been a coach in the NBA for numerous years, now a front-of-the-bench guy for the Jazz. Dave Smart, everybody knows Dave Smart, probably the most successful Canadian coach in history, had a great run at Carleton and has now moved on to Texas Tech and has done a ton of national team stuff. And then Chris Oliver, who was also coach during my time at Windsor, has become this basketball media monster with his podcasts and all the stuff he does on social media and has been a consultant for some of the best coaches in the world. So you got those coaches and then a lot of players who ended up having long careers at high levels overseas who've gone on to play for the national team at some level. So I like to look at that as kind of the golden age of Ontario basketball. And although there's not a lot of fanfare for Canadian university basketball, I don't think you can argue kind of the quality of the coaches and the basketball, especially during that time.
Well, you mentioned the fanfare. Everyone knows, the players' names. They know the star Canadians. But how important is it to have such a strong kind of coaching pipeline in place for basketball in Canada as a country?
I think it's huge. I think it's a big reason why, despite our population being small, we have so much talent, both on the men's and women's side. And it's a huge reason why these guys who maybe got overlooked to play Division I basketball in the U.S., they end up playing in Canada. They get really high-level coaching. They become great versions of themselves, and they go on to have really successful careers overseas. So, yeah, it's. I know it was huge for my development personally, and it's a big reason why Canada basketball is in such a great place.
So, as we mentioned, you played some university basketball. You played pro in Australia. What made you decide, okay, I want to shift careers and I want to be a scout?
Sure, yeah. So basketball has been in my life as long as I can remember. It was kind of coming to an end as a player. Body wasn't holding up great. And I kind of looked around and thought, what can I do to sustain, make a little money? Where should I build a career? And just the thought of not having basketball as the main part of my life was crazy to me. So I kind of looked at the front office route as a potential to kind of stay in the game while also using some of my other attributes, build a career that stays around basketball. Because being in basketball, it's special, right? I mean, it's a community. It's a beautiful game. It's a lot of fun to watch and be a part of. So always knew I wanted to stay in it. And the front office scouting group kind of made the most sense for where I was at that time.
So how did you kind of get your foot in the door then?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I was playing overseas. I actually met a woman who is now my wife while I was playing in Australia. She is an American. And during our last year, she got a job. Her old coach, when she was playing college, got a job at the University of Utah and brought her on the staff. So she left me in Australia and kind of left me without a choice of trying to figure it out and move to the US. Moving to the US and getting a job as a Canadian isn't as easy as people think. Um, you have to get a visa, and people weren't exactly giving work visas to someone like myself who had no real work experience at all. So I looked at the graduate school route as a way to come to the US for 2 years, and then that allows you to work for a year after without a visa. So as I was doing that, I quickly realized that I wanted to stay in basketball. I wanted to do something that kind of combined my knowledge of the game, and I was doing an MBA at the time, so I built like kind of some analytical skills and business skills, networking skills. So kind of something that would combine both those things. So while I was doing my MBA, I had zero connections with anyone in the NBA. So I just started reaching out to teams. I started a blog with scouting and doing some analytics projects. Um, Luckily, the Cavaliers have a process every year where they bring in one intern. Unlike a lot of NBA teams, it's a very democratic process. They interview a ton of guys on the phone, they bring a ton of guys in, and it really allowed me to kind of pitch myself, tell them my story, despite, like I said, I didn't know any of them personally. And I ended up getting that job as an intern. I spent a year in Cleveland as an intern. We only had one, so you kind of get to touch a lot of buckets there. You're helping the coaching, you're helping the medical staff, you're driving people to the airport, you're getting lunch, you're basically doing everything. So that was kind of the start for me. As my internship was ending, our West Coast scout moved on to a job with the Pelicans. So there's kind of an opening there. My wife was already in Salt Lake City. I kind of pitched them as that would be a good next spot for me to kind of focus on the West Coast, move out here and do that. And yeah, that was 5 years ago, and it's been working out ever since.
So yeah, you're now a member of the staff. You're on the scouting staff. Take me through a day in the life of Will. What does it look like? How much are you watching? What are you doing? What does it look like?
Yeah, so during the college season, I would say I'm on the road, 60 or 70% of the time. I'm lucky to have a great group of bosses that lets us and our scouting group build our own schedule. So I'm out seeing who I need to see, and then I can be back when I need to be back. When I'm not on the road, I'm here kind of in this exact spot in front of my monitors writing our report. So every time we go see kind of a draftable guy or someone we think that we need to be aware of, we create a scouting report that goes into our database and gets sent out to our front office. So I spend a lot of time writing those reports, and then I use Synergy a bunch. I'm responsible for kind of our West Coast conferences, and so any given day there might be 20 guys who play the game the night before, and I'll go check in on their Synergy clips, kind of keep up with what they're doing. A lot of time reading reports from the rest of our scouting group, and yeah, that's it. A lot of watching basketball, a lot of writing about basketball, and that's kind of the day to day.
How much when you're at a game, you're at a college game. What are you looking for? Obviously, each player is different, but kind of what are your eyes trained for at that moment?
Sure. So when I'm at a game, I like to focus on kind of the stuff you can't see on film, right? So a lot of the way they move, kind of what they're doing off the ball and in transition, their physical tools, that sort of thing. You get to get up close during pregame stuff and watch how they shoot the ball, how the ball is coming out of their hand, what kind of spin it's coming out with, how they're interacting with their teammates, their coaches, when they get subbed out, how they're acting with their team. Are they huffing and puffing on their way to the bench, that sort of thing. So kind of the stuff that you can't see on film is what I like to focus on when I'm there in person.
Are people next to you? Because you kind of you go there, you're in your plain clothes, you're not looking to you're not wearing a bunch of Cleveland Cavaliers gear, I imagine, when you go there. Are people like, what are you making so many notes for? Like, it's just a game, enjoy it.
Yeah, you often get people asking you questions about it, which I'm happy to answer. They like to give me their pitch on their favorite player and why they think they're an NBA prospect. But yeah, you can go incognito pretty well at some of these games, especially some of these games that are a little more empty. Find a couple of seats with some space and kind of do your thing.
Now, you mentioned the empty gyms. There's got to be some pretty packed ones you're going into, too. What are some of the, really cool college environments you've gotten to be a part of?
Sure. So I think there's kind of a list of the well-knowns that I talk about. I think Kansas is incredible. I mean, the history there, the place is filled 90 minutes before the game. They're standing up the whole game. They're chanting. It's probably the closest thing you'll get in North America to like a European soccer or basketball atmosphere. So that's probably the top of the list for me. Duke is obviously great. Purdue's kind of a sneaky one for being loud, and they just absolutely fill that place up. An underrated one here on the West Coast is Grand Canyon University. They're in the WAC. They're kind of up and coming. I think they've only been D1 in the last decade or so, but they've done an incredible job there, like building almost a party rave atmosphere. Like they have a full tailgate outside before the game even starts. It helps that they're in Phoenix, so they have great weather. And then massive student section and 50 or 60 employees that are students whose only job is to get the fans kind of riled up and get them chanting and that sort of thing. So if you have a chance or you're going through Phoenix, they're a really good team this year too. They're probably going to be someone who makes the tournament and makes a little bit of noise there. So that's an underrated one for those basketball junkies out there.
I'm making a note there for my my March Madness bracket.
Yeah, there you go.
Remember that one. How many games do you think? Pardon?
There'll be one of those 12 seeds that wins the 12-5 matchup.
Okay, I'm picking them. I'm putting next to it Will Harrison says, and I'm going to go for it. How many games do you think you get to attend in a year? It's got to be a lot.
Oh, that's a good question. I would say, so I have a good situation here where I'm in Salt Lake City, as I mentioned, and we have right here in kind of the greater Salt Lake City area, we have 4 Division I teams, and we have an NBA team and a G League team. So when I'm not on the road, there's almost every night I can get to a game here. So you think the season is November to April or so, I'm probably going to 20 or so games a month, I would say. So what is that? 120 or so games a year, something in that area, if you're counting NBA and G League.
That sounds like a basketball fan's dream.
Yeah. And I go to a lot of my wife's games as well, so you can knock off another 15 or so there. So I don't know if there's many people in the world who are going to more basketball games than I do.
That's fair. I remember one year, way back, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, watching lots of basketball. I actually tried to count, not how many games I went to in person, but games I watched and games I went to in person, whether it was on TV or in person. And I lost count in the 200 section, and I was like, all right, I can't do it. Well, when you add in,
Wow.
I watched, I was living in Fredericton, and I go to the university games there. There was two universities I go to, and I go to their men's and women's games. So then you could do 4 games in a day, and that adds
Right.
up. Plus,
Yeah.
watching some NBA in the evening, watching some March Madness, it gets there quick.
Yeah. Yeah. There's great basketball at every level. You just gotta find it and enjoy it.
Uh, Talking a little bit about March Madness, one of the things I've always kind of wondered from a scouting perspective is how much weight do you actually put into, how a player performs in the 1 or 2 games they might be in the tournament compared to the body of work you've seen over the whole season?
That's a good question. I think that's kind of a tricky one, and you've got to not fall into the trap of recency bias there, where the last couple of games you saw they played well, whether it be March Madness or the conference tournaments or whatever. But there's also some value in knowing that they can perform at the highest level when there's the most pressure, there's the most eyeballs. So you gotta kind of gotta fall in the middle ground there, where you're not putting too much weight on it because it's the most recent thing you've seen, but there's definitely some bonus points for playing well when the most is on the line.
Has there been any moments like that for you, whether it was, scouting for the Cavs or just watching games in general, where you've watched like a game or two and that kind of really changed your perspective on the player overall, just because, how they were able to climb in such a big moment?
Yeah, I think there's always guys every year who, they're not really, whether they're at a smaller school or they're not really on the scouting radar for whatever reason. And then, they sneak into March Madness. And um, CJ McCollum is a great example of that back in the day at Lehigh, where he's playing at a tiny school in a tiny conference. No one really knew who he was, and then he has a great 2 games in tournament, and you realize just because he's at a small school, and we didn't know him a few months ago, this guy can really play, and he goes on to be a top 10 draft pick and have a great career. So there's definitely, especially for those smaller school guys that we might know, we haven't had a chance to see in person yet. It's great to see those guys and how they can play against the best college basketball players out there.
Well, let's talk about one of those players that was highly scouted and definitely on people's draft boards, whether he played well in the tournament or not, and that's Evan Mobley. The Cavs ended up drafting him in 2021 with the 3rd overall pick. How involved were you with that scouting process, being he was at USC and you were covering the West Coast?
Sure. Yeah, that was a weird year because that was kind of the back half of COVID, and they weren't allowing anyone to come to games for the first, you know, couple months, and then they changed it where they were only allowing scouts to go to games. So I was able to go see him play a game, a couple games where there was like 5 people in attendance, and you could hear everything that was going on the court. That's some of the best scouting I've probably ever had. You got to sit right there, you got to hear everything. So it was cool to do that. But yeah, weird year. There was no combine, there were no draft workouts. But I think you could tell early on just kind of the way he defended for a freshman, his ability to move on the perimeter and protect the rim. He had such incredible instincts for a freshman. We learned quickly that he was a great kid, a great teammate. I wish I could take all the credit for that one, but I think our whole group loved him that year, and we were pretty fortunate to get him at 3.
Yeah, going back to that draft, obviously great choice at number 3, but you didn't know if you would have the number 3 pick that year or if you'd even land to you. How much, going into a season, do you really have to kind of cover all your bases because you don't know whether the front office is going to trade for a pick or really what's going to happen there?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, you have to cover all aspects of the draft. So especially, my boss, Kobe Altman, is really aggressive. He's always looking to move, whether it be up in the draft or down in the draft. So you got to be ready. We might pick up a 2nd-round pick here and there at the deadline. That year, if I remember correctly, I think we had the sixth or seventh best odds, and we actually moved up to 3. Um, so that was a great change. After the previous 2 years, we had the worst record in the league, and I think we drafted 5 both times. So yeah, you got to be ready. You can't assume anything in this business in terms of when you're going to have a pick, where it's going to be, and you got to be ready for all scenarios.
That must kind of come with a bit of pressure. You mentioned the losing record of the Cavs in those early years. Obviously, doing much better now, but at that kind of time, in some ways, we talked about hope at the intro. You're in a way the kind of hope of the year. If there isn't really anything going on in terms of how the team is doing, if they're not doing well, there's a lot of I don't know about if it's pressure or expectations on what happens in that draft.
Right. Yeah, my first year as an intern, I got the job 2 weeks after LeBron left and went to the Lakers. So we had a tough year that year. But it was also exciting. We knew as scouts that it was up to us to make sure you nailed that pick. And, that's kind of the way the NBA works. You have your ups and downs, but when you're down, you absolutely have to nail your pick at the top of the draft. So luckily, we had a couple good years and have been able to build some pieces to now where we're back in that playoff discussion where we want to be.
Now, I imagine that becomes a very busy time of year for you ahead of the draft. You've done all this work, you've watched all these college games, and then as you get close to the draft, you've got the draft combine, you've got individual workouts. What are those kind of weeks leading up to the draft like for you as a scout?
Yeah, those are some exciting times. My year as an intern, we had the 5th pick, and then we had a couple of second-round picks. So if I remember correctly, I think we brought in 150 guys to work out. So for me as an intern, that was almost 150 trips to the airport and back, 150 workouts that you're getting ready for. And yeah, it was go, go, go for 6 weeks, bringing all these guys in. It's exciting. Now, it's a little different for me being away. I'll come in for kind of our bigger workouts, and then I'm in for a week or so leading up to the draft. But yeah, that's when we really earn our salaries, is those few weeks leading up to the draft.
And again, back to that kind of balancing thing we talked about with weighing tournament games versus regular season games. There's also probably even more you got to weigh, like when you're talking about if they do a workout, if they have a bad workout, was that just one bad day, or if they have a really great workout, how do you kind of like balance all these different things and decide, well, that was just one good game or that was one bad workout, or do you have to really just kind of what do you do there?
Yeah, I think that can be a trap you can fall into, where a guy comes in for a workout and he has the best shooting day of his life, and you fall in love with him. And I think that's why we're working all year. So we're not just basing our decision on the last few. We have 10 or 12 reports in the system, and we're able to kind of track that improvement arc and kind of where they've been at the entire year against different levels of competition. You compare that to the workout, you compare that to how they played at the combine, and it kind of all goes into one big formula that kind of helps you build your board, to make sure you don't fall into the trap of judging a guy just based on 1 or 2 viewings.
That sounds like a kind of a fun thing to do, is building the board. What is that process like for you?
Yeah, so we, as scouts, there's 8 of us who kind of, as the year goes on, we kind of building our own individual board, and then we come together a few times a year to kind of talk about the guys we like, the guys we think we have too high, and then as a group we kind of build a board together. So you get different viewpoints, and again, you don't fall into the trap of I saw a guy where he played great twice, so I think he's a top 5 pick. That kind of balances out with the other viewings from the other group. to help build the best board possible.
Now you hear a lot of NBA analysts, people around the game will say, at the end of the day, the draft is kind of a crapshoot. Some of these things are just impossible to predict. How do you feel about that? Because you're putting all this work into it, so obviously it's not really fair to say it's just a crapshoot. Otherwise, the NBA teams wouldn't invest so much money into sending it to all these games, right?
Right. I think there is a small aspect of where a guy ends up can have a big effect on his career. You talk a lot about guys who go to the right situations, they're playing with the right type of players, they're getting an opportunity, can affect, the player they become. But it's definitely not an exact science. But I think there's enough of a track record there where you can look at different front offices around the league who have had a lot of success in the draft. And I don't think you can boil that down to them just getting lucky 5 or 6 times in a row. I think it's having a great process. It's having people in their office who are able to create an opinion and can voice that opinion and are willing to put their necks on the line for that opinion. So, it's not an exact science, but there definitely is some science to it.
Makes sense to me. I'll give you a chance to brag a bit here. Are there any guys, whether they were ended up drafting by the Cavs or not, that you really felt had a chance to be a great player, and now with some hindsight, you're able to say, yeah, I nailed that one. I was pretty right on with that one.
That's a good question. There's a couple guys that are on our team now who, as a group, we really liked, who I think, maybe the consensus wasn't quite high on. Craig Porter Jr. is someone this year who we signed as a two-way, an undrafted two-way out of Wichita State, who with our injuries lately has been up with the Cavs almost the entire year and has proven to be a really impactful player for us. So we're really happy about how that turned out. Another guy is Sam Merrill, who was here at Utah State. Someone that I think our draft group liked in the draft, even though he was kind of an older prospect and wasn't as heralded then. And he kind of bounced around the G League and ended up with us and is now playing a huge role for us again with our injuries. He's been massive, kind of keeping us afloat. So those are two guys as a scouting group that I think we're all pretty proud of.
You're going to give Raptors fans who, not too long ago saw Merrill just torch the Raptors. You're going to give them a little bit of they're going to be a little sad hearing that. But that is that he's definitely been great and so important, especially in a year like this where there's been some big injuries. Some of those later round picks that or even signings, they can come in. They can play some pretty important roles.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's some of the changes that have happened in college basketball recently has kind of made the depth of the draft increase. You see with NIL, guys are staying in college longer because they can make a pretty good living playing college basketball now. So there are players that may have been overlooked in the past because they were older and they'd stayed in college for 3 or 4 years. So it was kind of assumed that there was something wrong with them or they had a flaw in their game. Or actually now they're just staying in college because they can make a good amount of money. So those guys are we kind of had to change the way we had to think about those guys, and they're proving to be valuable kind of in the late first round, second round, and even into the undrafted territory.
Talking about the second round, we got some potential news this year that the 2024 draft may be split into 2 days, with the first round happening on day one, of course, and then the second round the next day. What does that mean for you? Does that mean it's going to be 2 very busy days, or does it kind of actually help you guys can have a bit more conversation as players are coming off the board, maybe make some better decisions even?
Yeah, personally, I think it's a great thing for us. In the past, with the second round, you only get a couple minutes between picks, and it can be kind of a whirlwind, um, especially in the second round where it's not quite as predictable as the first round. So you're not really sure who's going to be there, and you end up having to make a split-second decision on who you're going to take. And a lot of times in the second round, with the two ways, you want to get guys who are willing to come on a two-way, and you need to communicate that with their agent, and that takes some time. And to have to do that in the 2 minute window where you're trying to draft is difficult. So I think changing it to 2 days, giving us a little more time and more focus for that second round. And also, I think it's great for the prospects. In the past, there would be TV breaks during picks, and guys don't get that moment on TV where they get their name called with their family or whatever. So I think that will change, and you'll get to see every pick on TV, which I think will be a good thing as well.
What is that draft day? Maybe now eventually 2 days, but that draft day like for you? What kind of was that experience like that first time you went in? You were deeply involved with that.
Sure. Yeah. So to me, I'm always shocked at how hectic the actual draft is. Not so much for me, like my work's kind of done at that point. We've built our board, all the reports are written and submitted. It's kind of up to our bosses and the decision makers to kind of fulfill that at that moment. But yeah, it's just hectic. Like all of a sudden you're on the board. Guys who you thought were going to be there maybe aren't there. Maybe there's someone that you're completely shocked is still there, is up there, and you've got to figure out in real time, like, why is this guy slid 10 picks further than we thought he was going to? Is there something wrong with him? Has he been red flagged somewhere? So it's always kind of hectic. Not so much for me, as I said. I'm kind of almost like a fly on the wall at that point. They'll come to me for input on certain guys, and we'll vote out the actual pick. But in the moment, it's hectic for my bosses for sure.
One of the things I always think about when I'm watching the draft is how on earth does Adrian Wojnarowski and Sham Charania have they're tweeting the picks before Adam Silver's even said that? Is there any insight you can give on that, or not really?
Yeah, I think those guys have done a great job of building relationships with, let's say, the high level decision makers in front offices. And it goes both ways. They give information to the GMs, and in exchange, the GMs will give them information back. And, that's how it works. So I think, whether they're a Shams guy or a Woj guy, they're texting them that pick as soon as they know it's going down, just to give them that little edge. And then maybe one day down the road, those guys will give you a piece of information that you find valuable.
Now you've been not coaching, scouting for the last 6 years now. How has it kind of, I suppose, changed? How has scouting changed in the past 6 years since from when you started?
Sure. So I think, when I started, we were pretty far into the whole analytics stuff. So there hasn't been a huge change there. I think, at least for our group, we've started to buy into that a little more in my 5 or 6 years of doing this. So that's been a good change from what I think personally. And I think that's helped us. And then another thing is that I spoke to it a little bit earlier, is the way that the NIL is affecting the draft. When I first started, like I said, if a guy was a senior, 22 years old, he was a senior and 22 years old and in the draft because he had a major flaw. And those guys weren't always considered draftable. Whereas now, it's not that way. Guys stay in college for a number of reasons. It could be good financially. It could be good to allow them to develop their game. So we need to look at those guys and no longer dismiss them because they're older, and have played in college longer, and realize that those guys are legitimate college prospects now and will be for the foreseeable future.
So for anyone out there who's listening to this and they hear, this could be my dream job. Like, this is what I would like to do someday. What kind of advice do you give people who are looking to break into that kind of scouting field in one way or another?
Sure. Yeah, I get this question a lot, and there's no great answer, I don't think. Um, I don't think there's much rhyme or reason to how people get into this field. Like, you look at our group, we have guys who played at a really high level. We have guys who finished playing in high school. We have guys who came from coaching or were managers, and then we have guys who like had regular 9 to 5 jobs. I think the biggest thing is building your network and doing it in a more relationship oriented way. Um, a lot of people reach out to me and the first thing they ask is, how can I get a job, or do you have any openings, or that sort of thing. And I think, first of all, I don't really have the power to hire anybody at this point. And what little input I do have, I'm probably not going to vouch for someone who I don't know who's just asking for a job. So if you can do it in more in terms of building relationship, like someone reaches out to me and says, I really want to get into front office. I would love to connect with you and learn about your story and get any advice you have. I'm always happy to talk to that person. And then, I learn about them in our conversation, and maybe we would build a relationship. And then when it comes to the point of, building our pool of resumes for our internship, like I'll be more likely to add that person in the pool. The other thing is make sure you're doing something that involves basketball, no matter what level. I get a lot of people reaching out, and I ask them, why do you want to work in basketball? And they'll always say, I love it. It's my passion, whatever. And then I ask, like, okay, so what are you doing now to stay involved in the game? And they don't have anything. So I think if you're a college student, whether, not everybody can be managers, those are sought after jobs, but you could work with the women's team, you can work with a high school team, you can work building your own scouting reports, you can build a blog, you can work on analytics projects, something that you can show whoever's making the decision on hiring that, you have a good IQ for the game, and you have some work ethic to you, that you're willing to work with whatever level of basketball it may be. So I think those are the two things, building your network in the right way, and then doing whatever you can to be involved with basketball some way, so you can show them something tangible for when they start that hiring process.
At the end of the day, you've probably gotten used to being around the NBA and all that at this point. But is there any part of you where have you had any of these moments where you're just like, I can't believe I am doing this, or I can't believe I got to meet so and so? Have you had any kind of moments like that so far?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that first year, I feel like there was a moment like that every day. You go from, I was a graduate student, to all of a sudden you're in an MBA training facility, and the MBA, you're going to practice every day and that sort of thing. But the moment that really stands out was last year. I was in Cleveland for some scouting meetings, and we were going to the game, and it just so happened to be the night where Donovan Mitchell had his 70, I want to say it was 70 even, I should know that point game. And it was just like definitely the most incredible sporting event I've been to. And then to go from that to be able to, we all went into the locker room after and, gave him a hug and said congratulations, and were able to witness kind of what happened afterwards. And it was like truly part of sports history. So to be part of that sticks out as the moment where it was kind of a pinch me, and wow, I'm lucky to be able to do this as a job.
Yeah, there you go. There for a moment in history. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Just lastly, before I let you go, we mentioned some of the great coaches in Canadian basketball. Looking ahead, we've got the big 2024 Olympics. Canada, the men's team qualifying for the first time since 2000, which is a pretty great accomplishment. What are some of the players that you're, excited to watch from outside your job now, but just from a basketball fan and a Canadian fan? What are you kind of looking forward to at that Olympics?
Yeah, so I think is I'm a big Canada basketball fan. I was lucky enough to play for Canada a couple times um, back in the day, so I've kind of always followed it closely. And I think I was, well in that group that was a little bit frustrated at our lack of success for some time there, especially with how much NBA talent we had. But I think something that I realized, and I think people are starting to realize, is the FIBA game is far different from the NBA game. So just because we had a bunch of NBA talent didn't mean we were going to be successful at the FIBA level. I think we've kind of transitioned into figuring that out with our, from top level down, bringing on the right players that will fit into the FIBA system and coaching into that system. It helps that some of our top players have developed into some of the top players in the world. I think that made a huge difference this last summer at the World Championships. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to see how we do in Paris with, our very, very best players there. And I think you're starting to see it, the fact that it's the Olympics and it's Paris. I think the best players are going to be there for every team. So it's going to be exciting to see how we stack up kind of in that world order and if we can bring home the medal.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. It's great to hear about, your experiences so far, and, best of luck traveling the West Coast. At least, you're on the West Coast. You don't have to worry so much about those cold Stratford winters you were used to.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. I don't really have to deal with the winter weather, which makes traveling as much as I do a lot easier. And I'm also at a Delta hub, which helps a lot. And Delta's kind of figured it out. It's not like Air Canada where every flight is delayed. So that makes a huge difference as well.
Fair enough. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Philip. Enjoyed it. Take care.